Julia's interview, part 2. Also, we want to hear from you listeners. Got questions you want us to answer? Maybe things you're afraid to ask? Well, you can send a message to intrhythm@gmail.com. That's intrhythm@gmail.com. If you have to look up how to spell the word rhythm, I'm right there with you. But in case you need to know, it's intrhythm@gmail.com. And we will try our best to answer it for upcoming episodes. Unless you say otherwise, we will not mention your name when the question comes up. One more time, that's intrhythm@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Please send them in. Also, this music you're hearing is Baron Ryan. Check it out, firstofitskind.net. Now, part 2 of the incredible Julia Loving.
Integrated rhythm with Chisomo and Bobby.
So, Chisomo, I don't know if you noticed this, but Julia had a question for us.
Oh,
Yeah.
All right. Julia's question for us is, what does integrated rhythm mean from a 2021 lens, and what does it mean from a Caucasian white perspective? A lot of approach and time has been spent on the Black perspective, but I would like to have dialogue about how whites are navigating and sharing in the race conversation and the lack of Black agency in historically Afrocentric social dancing. A fantastic question.
It's a great question. Yeah.
I've been thinking about this a lot ever since Julia sent it.
Okay.
And that it's one of those things that my brain is kind of like running in so many different directions it hasn't necessarily gotten anywhere. On the one hand, this is a journey that's been happening for a while now, right? It's not just since the pandemic that this has been a problem in the scene, and that it's been something that we've been talking about in the scene.
Right. That's why we have had all these panels, and even before COVID, we've had inclusion panels. I've had to have a list created that I created with the Frankie Manning Foundation as to the steps that
The 21 questions.
the 21 questions as to what you need to do to make your event or your scene more inclusive. But that's coming from my lens. Coming from a Black American lens. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out how is this being, because always it seems like, the black people are addressing issues of race all the time.
Right.
And I just saw something about Brett Favre making a statement about the kneeling of football players, and I'm like, he's made millions off of sending that ball out, and he's got under just under a Black he's been able to get his only championship ring through Black male football players, and for him to make a comment like that, I just felt like, wow, how are we addressing that in our own scene? That so many have made money off of the backs and histories and legacies of this dance, and of course we have the Black Lindy Hoppers Fund, and people generously donate. But I'm saying, yeah, money is fine, but are we changing again, like laws, acts, amendments, but mindsets? Are we changing mindsets? What are we doing in the scene, but from a perspective of white people? What are white people doing to change that feeling? Is there, that separation?
Yeah. And I know that, the quarantine has put, I think, a lot of people in kind of a book club mode, for lack of a better word, where they're reading about it, they're educating about it. I know several dancing instructors who are holding book clubs with their students.
Yeah.
But again, that's just the book club phase. When does that phase end and the action phase finally takes over? And maybe that's, if we take that back to, Beantown 2018, when Julia ran this really amazing, I don't know what you would even call it. It was just like a gathering. It was a gathering of
it was my communal circle.
Communal circle, right?
Circle.
it
Yeah.
Which
it
the
it takes me
Stonewall
back
ran
to
too,
our
and that's when I first met you.
yeah, I was gonna say it
You,
takes me back to our I think it was our second conversation ended up being like several hours because we were planning that
yes,
and you were like, how should we structure this? And I was like, I think about Ubuntu
yes,
in the circle.
yes,
You're like, let's do a communal circle.
Yeah. That
So,
was another incredibly beautiful thing
yeah,
that happened.
yeah,
That, and I remember very distinctly the privilege walk. That was the first privilege walk I had ever seen.
yeah.
And
And see,
for those of you who are
I've done communal circles with my students, and I've done the privilege walk with my students. So a lot of stuff that I brought to you all as the Lindy community were things that I actually work on with my actual high school students. And my night school students that are, my at-risk night school students that I want them to graduate. But yeah, so bringing those inclusivity panels in 2018, body. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
no, no, it's right.
yes, yes. And I wanted to be able to offer it's our community. We wake up to blackness every day.
Right,
We go to
right,
sleep to blackness every day. We're saturated and exhausted with blackness. So I guess what I want to know is and how are whites adjusting or sharing in this, you know, because a lot of it's rooted in white racism and white supremacy and white
right.
entitlement,
Yeah, yeah,
you know? And
yeah.
yeah. So
I mean, from my very limited perspective as, like an instructor, particularly mostly in the Balboa scene, um, it's those things is you have conversations a lot with other instructors who are like, oh, yes, obviously. Or, like there's a
yeah,
whole lot of like, these things are indeed obvious.
yeah.
And, how can we do, then there's the question of like, what action steps do we take to fix this situation? And, a lot of those action steps, I think, are currently maybe in just like a very young part of their process, right? They're like, okay, we talk about the history of the dance in our classes.
Okay.
Um, so that's a step.
Yes, that's a
Um,
start.
but
Yes.
but yeah, so where do you go from there? And you're like, well, okay, well, let's think about how we teach this dance and whether that's in harmony or not with the way that the dance was experienced, you know, with the original dance, or with people who do this with Black American dancing legacy. Like is what we're teaching is how we're teaching this dance and what we're teaching, is it going against that? Those are questions that I'm asking myself a
Mhm.
lot as an instructor. um, and then there's like who's in the room, who is not in the room, that is the door closed, and who's the door closed on, and how can we open that door?
Right.
you know Great abstract questions, but as soon as you get into like the concretes, that's when the nitty gritty work starts. And I wonder, to some extent, I wonder, like, you know, uh, I think, like, a lot of this obviously will take place in the local level, right? Because
Yes.
people don't just come into the international scene. That's not usually their first step in the door of
Right.
Lindy Hop. It's usually their local scenes,
Right.
and how the local scene is. And that made me think that, like, I think a lot of us dancers now, and maybe I'm just speaking from my own, like, very specific perspective.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of us dancers think of the scene as nationally being like the big focus, and then like the local scene being like the like side focus, or like the thing that you do in between the time that you're experiencing the national scene. Like
Right.
maybe people who get to go to a lot of international events or national events and stuff, maybe they think of the dance scene that way. um, uh, as opposed to realizing that your local scene is where, like, is the foundation of the scene. That's where everything lies.
That's right.
And so what things can we do in the local scene to help, you know change things?
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
I guess I'm really fascinated by how when things start coming back to normal, how the pandemic will have changed that,
Well,
if
it's
it
going
will
to
have
be some
changed that.
interesting. Yeah, it's going to be some interesting dynamics. You know, but I still say, we've had conversations even before the
Yeah.
pandemic. So we'll
Oh
we'll
yeah.
we'll see. But I'm happy to know that there are scenes that did reach out and want to know how to do so. It's certainly like these are the things that even with the Black Lindy Hoppers Fund, some of the things that we want to do is actually be able to hire and if people want to and we have residencies, we have you know We'll have instructors that are available, for even Black event organizers that want to hire and want to be able to have these different things play out in their own scenes, and to encourage that as well. And have people, instead of people always going downtown in Manhattan, they can come uptown,
Yeah.
and the willingness of people to want to come uptown, you know. And I think that has a lot to do with it as well, is the willingness of whites to want to come uptown, and be a part of that different scenery, you know, and certainly, Swing with Us NYC has had that. We've had quite a few, you know,
Yeah.
and that support is really good too, you know.
Something I've loved so much. Sorry, I
That's okay. You saw my cat.
all of our regular listeners know that this is almost like the sirens are like a guest,
Yes,
special guest appearance.
that's right.
Uh, Something I really enjoyed and felt so great when I came up to your dances the few times I've been able to come up is first off, there's almost like a really strong familial sense. Like there's people of all generations in the room, and there's lots of people of all generations.
Yes,
Like and you walk in, and like you also there's a little bit of that like it's the times I've been, it's been in a very intimate space in a really
yeah,
beautiful way that like
yeah,
basically a lot of people are going to be sitting in chairs watching you dance, which is kind of lovely in a way because again it's part of that community spirit of
yes,
like
yes. My
like
mom,
you're not
my
just
mom greets you at the door.
yeah
my mom,
yeah
my mom keeps the people from the outside that are, don't necessarily want to be in there, to dance. They want to come in and, So my mom is the security too, right? And then we have
yeah,
Ronald, and we also play, not only jazz. We have the
exactly
we have our own Uptown Groove that we do, because
exactly
what we call it is the Uptown Saturday Night Swing, Uptown Saturday Night Lindy Hop, um, and so we do invite, people from different generations to come, different, everyone. So it's a more inclusive space, and that's what I want. And a good part of that is bringing snacks, and bringing people like to snack, and they like
yeah.
water, and they like, when you make it that like homely, and like you're at home, it definitely is a familial
Isn't that
space.
interesting how the swing scene has kind of lost that like basic rule of throwing a good party
Yeah,
is having snacks and drinks around?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And it's
man,
just as simple as that.
it's so simple, but so powerful.
It's just as simple as that, seriously, you know. And people at the Savoy did sit down and watch.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
you can't expect some of these older our elders to be dancing all throughout these fast songs. And like, I'm gonna sit this one out. you know.
yeah,
And what I do like is that you'll see a person from one generation dancing with another generation, and someone that's white that's dancing with someone black. So you talk about integrated rhythm, definitely, is that. But they're uptown doing that,
yeah,
they're in Harlem doing that, you know and that it was important. Like when I actually really went and started learning Lindy Hop itself, I learned in Harlem. I learned in my first example was seeing those elders dancing in the park. My second example was actually, and I always forget that I really started out learning from Arturo Perez. You remember Arturo that used to work at Swing 46? Arturo, um, so he was teaching at Wadley High School, and I went there a few times. And something happened. I think my schedule, I couldn't do it anymore. And, I just so happened to work with Barbara Jones, Barbara Allison Jones, Barbara Bronx, with the Harlem Swing Dance Society. And she invited me to come. And at that time, I believe Adam Brokowski was teaching with her. And I took maybe like one lesson with him, and then Samuel Coleman took over. And it changed my life. And I swear to God, you all would not believe this. I mean, I'm plus size as it is, but I was even more plus size then. I couldn't do swing outs. I couldn't, it's like the rock steps and stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, this is too much. I would go home sore, my legs would be hurting, and I ended up losing about 30, 40 pounds, taking class with Samuel. And it was just a great experience being able to. And then we started his community really really was there, and we had all kinds of intergenerational. So that was my first example of that, in Harlem, seeing Samuel run it, and seeing, with the Harlem Swing Dance Society. He's since, started his own dance classes on Tuesdays, which we really miss. And then we started, and another part of that whole communalness was to be able to, as a group of, and I call it my Harlem Lindy family. We travel, and we travel together. We go places together. So like when we go up to Beantown, now we have two apartments full of people coming from Harlem, going, and staying, and our global family coming, our global Black family staying with us as well. But those, hey, I would say Samuel's the one that really introduced me to the music, because I was never a big jazz person. My parents, like I said, were Motown, but the way he would teach it was he wouldn't separate the music from the dance. He would teach about the musicians, the history, what was going on, and this made it very helpful for a lot. I like history. I know a lot of it, but it helped a lot of people that were coming in that did not have that, frame of reference with regards to the dance. So this is something that was being done back in, he's been teaching for a while, but I started like in 2015. Um, and my first experience was going to Frankie 100 with him and our Lindy family. And I was like, my God, I didn't know all these people were doing, and it was like global. I'm like, all these people. And then
That's quite
I
an
met,
initiation.
so yes, what an initiation, you know. I met Chaz. I met Chester Whitmore. I met Chaz Young. I met, Sugar Sullivan. As a matter of fact, I escorted Sugar Sullivan and Barbara Billups up to Harlem for something they were doing. They were teaching a dance with Sonny Allen. They were teaching. So that was my first, meeting of even Sonny Allen and all of them. So I started learning, quickly through that communalism that Samuel brought, to and all of us went out and danced because of that. We would go on trips to Swing 46, and I was like, this is a big thing. And I just really wanted, I was like, and it's a dance from the African American community. That's what I really gravitated to it, because I know for a long time, that it's still important for us to support our own, histories and legacies, and our, you know, to know about it ourselves. And I thought it was very important that, when I would Google, I didn't see Black people, like in the images. I'm like,
Mhm.
but this is a dance that comes out of Harlem. How does this happen? So it was, that part of me also came out. The historian part just wondered why. So, and I started bringing it to my school, and I started teaching my kids, and I would bring guest teachers to come, and talk to my students about, the history of this dance they call the Lindy Hop, this jazz dance. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, so what you just said kind of perfectly segues into my response to your question.
Okay.
So your question was mentioning that oftentimes, like, we don't have a choice as people who are holders of racialized identities. We don't have a
Yes.
choice in how we engage in these topics,
Yes.
because the world society decides for
Yes.
us. And um so you've seen a lot of voices like come through with integrated rhythm, and the majority of those voices are from a particular perspective,
Right.
from a racialized identity,
Right.
right? um, the hope with integrated rhythm isn't for the onus of the work to be put on Black
Right.
people, but to elevate stories. So when we think about like Chimamanda Adichie's A Danger of a Single
Right.
Story, we know that we're likely to fall into the trap of thinking that a particular group of people is monolithic if we don't have a diversity of
Right.
stories. And so our hope in integrated rhythm is to elevate stories from a variety of different perspectives so that people can hear and do their own work. recognizing that the work of dismantling oppression is nuanced and integrated. We kind of have chosen this approach so that we can work together. And then also, what you get in every episode is a conversation across racialized identities,
Yeah.
which is the integrated part of integrated rhythm, right? And so, um, when I think of the work of white people, I do agree that like we as Black people alone cannot dismantle racism. Anyone holding a racialized identity, so whether that is Black,
Yeah.
AAPI,
Yeah.
across the spectrum, right? It is not our job, it is not our responsibility to dismantle the system that oppresses us. So we must partner together, and we all have to do our work to also question our internalized processes. Another beautiful thing that I think you get with integrated rhythm is you get to hear and see a white guy listening to people a lot. Like Bobby does this
Mr.
beautiful
Bobby White.
job, right, of
Yes.
being the white guy in the room
Yes.
that sometimes just lets people say what they need to
Yeah.
say, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yes.
and then also like is totally owns his identity and isn't, trying to be anything other, and isn't trying to, like he himself can't dismantle this entire system. But I think what's beautiful is that we get to have this moment, we get to have these coffee time moments, these opportunities to share stories and bring proximal things that are far away.
Yes.
Frankie Manning, Norma Miller, these are iconic names, but they're not mainstream
No.
names, right?
Right.
And so, but if I say, like you said, Gene Kelly, if I say, oh my goodness, all of the names have gone, Ginger Rogers,
Fred
right? Like
Astaire.
there's certain,
Fred
right? Sorry.
Astaire. And Fred Astaire.
Yeah, Fred Astaire. You were in my brain. You knew exactly. I was like, that's the name.
Fred Astaire.
So like, we have these names that are household names, but like names like Frankie Manning, and like the Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, like those should be household names, but because of racism, we don't know them as household
Right.
names. They've contributed so much to our dance history in the U.S.
They've
Like,
in that
yeah,
they've contributed what Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly do for the most part. Like they're doing tap dance in a Black American style, and like like people would say of Fred Astaire, like one of his famous like review quotes or whatever is that he was white on top and black on the bottom. That like
mm,
his feet and stuff and the way that he danced was very Black American, and he just happened
yeah,
to he was on top. He was that elegant white
yeah.
face.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was taking from this community, but then he was able to be elevated because his story, his person was more
Like Arthur Murray,
acceptable across.
like Arthur
Yeah.
Murray, just, able to open up hundreds of spaces of dance, but really rooted in jazz dance. That he, like,
Yeah.
so, we have to talk about the appropriation versus the appreciation. And also we need to talk about the
Right.
money. Like, you follow the money, then you'll see, evidence of what is and what was, you know?
Right. Exactly. And document like money hand in hand goes with documentation. So we have these films, we have screen time, and people who looked a particular way got money in screen time, and people who looked another way did not. Like, and it was as simple as
Yeah.
that. And so
And
um
the ones who
I mean,
didn't, the ones who weren't white didn't get to choose how they were represented.
Correct.
right,
Like they,
exactly.
Correct.
yeah, they're not gonna tell Fred Astaire to ham it up for the like, yeah, they're not gonna tell him to like
Or put on a
act a
baker's
little bit more
outfit,
dumb.
or put on a
Yeah,
baker's
exactly.
outfit, or put on a outfit. We had that conversation about, about Whitey's Lindy Hoppers having to wear all of these service like wear. I'm the chauffeur, I'm the baker, I'm the cook, Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But they
absolutely. And
did so,
I
when
would
I think
also
about it, they did so that we did not, so we do not have to, in many ways. Like every generation is supposed to get better, you know
mm,
and I think that has a lot to do with how we can move forward too, is to to really accept the fact that this was done to a people, and that the people here
Yeah.
reaping benefits from it need to have that understanding as well. And I think that
Yeah.
education is a big part of it. And I can't,
Yeah.
I can't fault a lot of whites for not knowing, because I look at a school system that I work for that is definitely Eurocentric. I'm teaching US history this semester, and as I told my students, I said I'm going to teach you from a lens of marginalization, oppression, and we're going to look at American history from the perspective and eyes of Native Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans, African Americans. And you can't even, in many ways, if the system's broke, it has to be redone. It has to be refurbished. It has to be, and people have to learn and be willing to learn as educators themselves the history,
Yeah.
and not be afraid of it and don't deny it. So when I think of integrated, that's what I'm thinking about. And it's not saying, oh, we're begging for charity or we're begging for empathy, but we're here. We want to exist. And this is the way that we can all properly exist if we actually are able to accept the good, the bad, and the ugly, of
Yeah.
this history. The fact is, we had white supremacy storming a nation's capital with Confederate flags. So we do have a population of American folks that are rooted in supremacy, white supremacy, and white empowerment. So this is a 2021 lens and issue that we're going to, and it will trickle into our community, our dance community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think that as much as I think the majority of the white people in the scene are not intentionally meaning to be racist, it's they we all need to understand as white people that we're part of. There's not just one of us. Is an overwhelming number of us, and I use that word very specifically. An overwhelming number of us that our actions, even if unintentional, are going to be a giant force on whatever goes on in the swing dancing scene. And so in a way, we have to be hyper vigilant about our actions and about what we do in the scene in order to keep ourselves from overwhelming, the scene in an unhealthy direction.
Yeah. I would actually say that white supremacy is the norm and it's internalized in all of us. And it's something where all of us have to endeavor to interrupt white supremacy within ourselves. Privilege is hard, and when people at like the word racist, like so many people don't want to identify with that
Yeah.
word, but if we can humble ourselves and recognize that when we say you, when someone is talking about ways to make things better, the you apply. If you have a brain and you're hearing me and understand what I'm saying, that applies to you.
Yeah.
It's not the person behind you, it's not the person next to you, it is you. And so, and in that that interruption of our autopilot, which is based in Eurocentric thinking, that is based in white supremacy, like if we take some time and some courage and are self-reflective, we can make a difference. But it's something that has to be owned by every single member of the swing dance community. It's something that everybody needs to deal with. I was listening to Brene Brown earlier this week, and she said like the number one like key indicator that she's found in her research about leadership is courage.
Yes.
And in understanding courage, like fear isn't the opposite of courage. Actually, what is the opposite of courage is self-protection.
Yes.
And
Hmm.
so recognizing that our self-protection does more harm than our fear does, and pushing beyond our fear to do things scared, to ask questions, to humble ourselves perpetually, put ourselves in that place where we might not be right and where we might feel fragile, and that's okay.
Yes.
But to recognize that that's part of a learning
Yes.
process. Like if there was something I were to say to all of us, but specifically white people, would be to do that. Be brave, do the work,
Yeah.
and recognize that in doing the work, you're making the world, the scene, and your other worlds better.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah.
You heard enough and now it's time for the break.
Hey everyone, we here at Integrated Rhythm love supporting black businesses. Why? Because if capitalism has been against black people for so long, one of the ways we can help them rise up again is through capitalism. So throw some money at their community, please. This week, our black business that we'd like to spotlight happens to be a swing dancer. So there's thousands of more reasons why you should support them to help give the scene more life and energy, because it is Julia Loving, the amazing Julia Loving, the, dare I say it, loving Julia Loving. And she is the owner and proprietor of Lucky Lindy's, which is a comfortable, form-fitting undergarment made of high-quality spandex. They were designed to be worn under all types of dresses and skirt styles, and pants, by the way. They are light and they've got sturdy sewing because they know what you're going to put them through. And I even hear rumors of secret pockets that you can hold secrets in. They have all sorts of colors and patterns. They're killing it. You should check them out. And they even have these amazing sparkling cutters that are sparkling colors that are fantastic for those performers out there who want to show some sparkle. You can find Julia Loving's Lucky Lindy's at Lucky Lindy's NYC Etsy store. That's right. Go to Etsy, type in Lucky Lindy's, Lindys NYC, click, and you'll go there and you'll love it. By the way, what is that fantastic music we're listening to again? It's Baron Ryan. That's Laurel's brother, a badass pianist known for his combination of classical and jazz music. His new album, first of its kind, is rights free. You heard us correct. Anyone can use it. Put it on your podcast, your YouTube video, your own music project. It's all yours. Want the album and any of his other work? Head to baronryan.com. Want to hear him play with Ryan's father, yet another badass pianist? Head to ryanandryanmusic.com. And most importantly, you can contribute to Baron's project of making rights-free music. Because as delicious as it is, you can't live off of admiration and appreciation. Go to firstofitskind.net. Check out the story, learn how awesome his project is, and help support it. That's firstofitskind.net.
Podcasting ain't free. Podcasting ain't free. You may think it costs no money, but podcasting ain't free. Whee! The break is over, now it's back to the show.
Is there anything, Julia, that you really want to make sure that you got a chance to say?
Other than when we are up and running after COVID, and we'll continue doing our Swing With Us NYC events in Harlem. I also sell Lucky Lindy's NYC, which are undergarments for the dancer in you, all shapes, sizes, and patterns and colors. And they're available on Etsy.com.
I mean, I haven't worn them personally, but they look fantastic. The colors and all the things, and they have like great sparkly ones. If you're a performer, you should totally get in on those.
I gave Latasha a pair of African print. I've given Avita some, and Vita's like, oh, this holding me in very great. So yeah. So Lucky Lindy's NYC. I was going to just tell you all one of these things about something that's controversial but funny to me. I think I'm always talking about, because I live in the Bronx, right? But there's a controversy about where hip hop was started, right? So to take it a little bit lighter, right? There's a controversy that hip hop did not necessarily start in the Bronx. And so you could ask anyone from New York City, and you could ask Nas, he'd be like, oh, hip hop started in Queens. You could ask somebody, special ed, it started in Brooklyn, And then you could ask the old timers, they say, well, no, it started with Pigmeat Martin, and here comes the judge, right? And then you could ask somebody else, say, nah, that was Louis Armstrong scatting. And you know, that was that thing in Harlem that they did at the Renaissance Ballroom and that Bronx Savoy Ballroom back in the 70s, right? And then they could say, oh no, it gets serious. They say the last poets did it. And you know that song, you know, Gil Scott Heron, The Revolution will not be televised. They said that's the raps, that's it. Or maybe it was Quincy Jones when he spoke about the griots having that rap, you know, using rap as a way to communicate, you know, to the other villagers, you know. Um, or it could just be that funk, you know, that revolution and funk that comes out of the Vietnam War era, right? Or you could. So I just thought that was funny because I'm always battling, and you know I'm from the Bronx, so I'm going to say certainly I'm going to say it started in the 70s in the Bronx. It started with Cool Herc. It started with Africa Bambaataa, and it started with DJ, no MC, no, what is he? Grandmaster Flash, DJ Grandmaster Flash. But then they'll say no, it started with Grandmaster Flowers that was in Queens. So I just yeah. So it's just funny to me. I thought, and there's an actual video that Chuck D from Public Enemy just came out, I'd say a few years ago, called "Founding Fathers: The Untold Story of Hip Hop." And you know, I'm a child of the hip hop era, and so I just thought that was something that you know is funny to me, you know, that people, and it's great to hear all of these different perspectives, right? Because I know I didn't think of it, you know, and I just naturally know it's from the Bronx, right? But there are other perspectives.
That that reminds me, like, so first off, folks, you heard it here. If you want to fight, you know where to find Julia Loving. She'll take you on.
And then
That reminds me.
one more mention. DJ Frankie Crocker on WBLS 107.5 here in the Bronx is still the only hip hop radio station besides 90, was it 90 Hot 97, and you know, but it's one of the originals that played hip hop music that's still, you know, going around. And some say that Frankie Crocker used to have some rhymes too, you know, and that's where people got it from.
So that reminds me of two things. First off, when I saw the Evolution of Hip Hop documentary on Netflix, have you seen that?
Yes.
When I first saw that, you know, it made me so envious of that history, and that because like someone would be like, "Oh yeah, well that's happened at this one party that I went to," and
Yes.
everyone else is like, "Yeah, I was at that party too. That definitely happened. Here's the flyer from the party." Like to have that much like definitive history
Yeah.
and have like the oral story still around.
Yeah.
So just imagine like being able to sit around, you know, Whitey's Lindy Hoppers and hear them, you know, talk like that,
Yeah.
and to have a 8-part Netflix documentary
Well,
on
when
it.
you think about it, Lindy Hop and hip hop are two of the dance crazes that were founded out of the black community in New York City, right? And they
Yeah.
both had the music to accompany the dance.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah. I
know,
mean,
so there's hip hop, you know, of course the four elements with dancing and b-boying and break dancing and all of that coming out of, you know, hip hop. And then you have the Lindy Hop coming out of with jazz, you know,
yeah.
jazz dancing. You know, so you know, I thought that was cool. And the fact that hip hop also was performed at the Renaissance Ballroom and performed at
Yeah.
the Savoy, you know,
Savoy Manor.
the Savoy Manor, right?
Did you ever get to go to Savoy Manor?
Yes, yes, yes. You know, my mom and dad. I don't know, for some reason, back in I'm thinking in the 70s or whatever, they used to have parties there sometimes. You know, um, and my family would go to them. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. For those listeners who don't know, the Savoy Manor was the ballroom that opened 2 years after the Savoy closed down, and
yeah.
it was the continuation of the Savoy legacy. That's where Mama Lou Parks uh, was her home base as she trained all the Lindy Hoppers for the Harvest Moon Balls, and it continued to be a part of the neighborhood history, including some of the first hip hop stuff was happening in that
Mm-hmm.
venue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I bring to is my hip hop stuff. You know.
Well, something that's so cool. Something that's so cool is that you yourself were part of a great migration story, very similar to our elders in the dance. You yourself grew up in New York City, which if you haven't grown up in like a neighborhood area like in New York City, like the Bronx or Harlem, is a very specific place. It has a very specific feeling and a very specific energy to it.
Absolutely.
And you yourself witnessed the rise of hip hop
Oh,
happening in a very similar way that the rise of jazz dance happened.
yes.
And so you have like
I'm a witness.
all these links to like
Yes,
the
I'm a
legacy of the
witness.
dance.
And I used to be I have older brothers, and their brother, my brothers had friends, and they called themselves the Juicetown boys. But now they're the Juicetown men because they're mostly in their 50s and older. And I was a tag along. I tagged along everywhere. My brother's like, stand behind me, But I was a witness to it. I was young, and I would have my girlfriends with me. We would go bike riding. They used to have a place in right here I live in the northeast section of the Bronx. It was called Valley Park, and that's where all the hip hop jams would be. Anyone would come through there, and they would jam, and you would hear all kind of DJing, and a lot of it was through like the electricity that came from the lamppost. It wasn't running from people's homes; it was coming from the lamppost. Uh, and after a certain while, they would still try to jam with the lights out, lights on, and it's just, yeah. So yes, I was a witness to a lot of it. My brother used to rap. As a matter of fact, my brother's DJ left them. Well, I'm not going to say he left them. He was a DJ for two groups, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And why this is well relevant is because during the Crush Groove era of the 80s, this is where a group called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde comes about. And Andre Harrell, who's recently passed, started Uptown Productions. And you know who was his intern? Sean Puffy Combs. Okay, so I'm just saying. So like when you're thinking about legacies, those are legacies that that similar into Lindy Hop, but same in hip hop. Who you interned with? Who taught you? You know, um, he Andre Harrell with Uptown Productions also um, brought out Mary J. Blige, Jodeci, um, the Fat Boy, not the Fat Boys. What's his name? I can't even think of his name right now. But so many groups came out of Andre Harrell, which was one of these, pioneering uh, and talking about black agency, starting his own record company. You know, when he started seeing that a lot of blacks were being ripped off in the hip hop industry. Same thing with Russell Simmons, but they all have ties to like the originators of hip hop. You know, and I still say it was in the Bronx. Yeah, so that's my little controversy, but funny. At the same.
And the other thing that makes me think about is like the origin of Lindy Hop stories, right?
Yes,
Like
yes, it's so
no, it was Shorty
parallel.
George here. No, 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 no. It was Herbert Whitey said he invented it.
That's
No,
right.
no,
That's
no, no,
right. Right. If
no.
you juxtapose them, you will see so many parallels. That
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I guess that's probably why I gravitated so much to Lindy Hop because of that same kind of history. And it being of the streets, of the people, of the community.